So let's get one thing straight, okay? There is nothing neutral about penetration. And that's what we're going to talk about in this session. It's been lovely to see the comments, really interesting conversation happening inside the comments on my last video about how um, you don't know who a man is until he's aroused. You don't know who you are engaging with, who you're interacting with. And I think sometimes it's very disingenuous when I see, responses along the lines of, well, that's why you should bond with somebody in advance. That's why you should really get to know someone before you have sex with them. That is disingenuous, completely disingenuous, because you can, in both non-consensual and consensual sexual experiences, you are meeting a different version of that person. Okay, people's sexual proclivities, desires, behaviors, and habits are not evident and visible in their everyday lives, right? We are constantly working with people in an office, in a warehouse, just out and about. When you're standing in the queue in Tesco or Whole Foods, whatever supermarket you're in, you don't fully know and understand the person in front of you, the person behind you's sexual behaviors, appetite, desires. Again, this is something I see very commonly that men will say that, well, you need to vet the person, you need to bond with the person before. That does not tell you or indicate accurately how this person behaves in a state of arousal. Now, I've said this so many times, that's not anti-men, that's not anti-sex, okay? This is just about the realities of sexual behavior that often happens behind closed doors. Okay, behind closed doors in private. And there is something when you speak to women and men who have sex with men in particular, if you are the one being penetrated, the experience is viscerally different. And to give the impression to women that this is just something that you should have known about in advance, is something that you can detect and assess and uncover before that moment, is just disingenuous, and it's actually very dangerous. And that's the entire reason why I talk about invisible contracts and women, invisible contracts and sex in particular, because there are lots of different invisible contracts across the spectrum, religion, money, etc. But when we're talking about women, sex, and invisible contracts, that's the whole point. These are invisible dynamics that quite often you are unaware of before you get there. And I will never move away from this point unless you are somebody who has sex with men or have been in a sexual scenario with a man. You may not know about this, and you can't speak to it. You cannot speak to what it's like to be the person who is a receiver of penetration. You can't speak to what that experience is. And so attempting to, bring up these red herring arguments, etc., about love and connection, none of that matters. Because ultimately, this is what cracks me up. Because even when you think about married couples, you can be married but not in love. Married couples are telling this to us all the time. They're telling us about the highs and lows of marriage all the time. They don't always feel this sentiment of romance and desire and attraction, but they're still having sex. Okay? You've got people who are in love with each other, but the sex is not satisfactory. The sex is not pleasurable. This happens all the time. And this is why I can't stand it when people, aren't able to handle complexity, nuanced conversation, and really and truly you're being a child, right? Instead of being mature, using your critical thinking skills, right? The whole point of an invisible contract is what you're taught, what you might believe, and the gap between what is actually happening and what is actually being experienced on a bodily level, on a nervous system level. And so unless you've ever really had sex with a man or been in the presence of a man that is aroused, whether it's consensual or non-consensual, you can't speak to this with any lived experience. And anyway, so penetration is not neutral. Culturally, it's not neutral. From a body perspective, there's nothing neutral about being penetrated with whatever one is being penetrated with. Okay, whether it's actually a penis or another object or instrument. Individuals who have vaginas who go and get smear tests, for example. Maybe you are a woman who has been pregnant, is pregnant, and you have to be examined. Yeah, this is what I mean. Sometimes we've got people who don't have the experience, the real lived experience, who are sharing ideas, and you can have your opinion. But as I said, often if you don't have the lived reality, your opinion is of far less value. And this kind of conversation is crucial for a lot of young women and women in general to be having, because it's actually the psychological reality, the nervous system reality, the bodily reality, the practical reality of intercourse is not discussed at all. And it can be incredibly shocking, traumatic for the body, even in consensual experiences. That is why these conversations really should be had. In my view, this is really the missing part of sexual education. And the fact that women are constantly sent these messages around romance and love, this masks over, quite frankly, some of the other indicators of whether or not this individual is a safe partner. This individual can still maintain their senses, can still treat you and see you as a human being in the midst of sex. When they are aroused, are they still treating you with dignity? And so I saw a few comments around consent. Consenting to be in a sexual scenario with someone is just step one. Because what most of the time you're not consenting to is pain. You're not consenting to discomfort. You're not consenting to anything that feels violating. You are consenting or saying, yes, I am willing, interested, I want to have sex with you, or some kind of sexual activity. You're not consenting to anything and everything else that can possibly happen after that point. You are not. And so you can have all the talks before intercourse begins, before you're alone for the first time or alone another time. That does not mean that that individual, one or more individuals, is going to keep the agreement, one, and two, that their behavior in the state of arousal is going to still be respectful and mindful of the fact that you're a real human being with a real body that feels real things. And it's not just the body, it's the mind as well. Because when people speak about violation, it's not just about the body. It's about how that affects the soul, the person. Okay? And so I think that it's so important. This is why I don't mince my words. On TikTok, I have to be very selective about my words because the platform can flag you. But it doesn't help when people respond by saying it's all about love and romance and communication. That's all airy-fairy. It often doesn't translate into the reality of the sexual experience for either side. And by the way, some of this, I mean, obviously I talk about it from the perspective of, penetration, and you're the one receiving the penetration. But ultimately, regardless of your gender, you matter in these scenarios too. This is why I've said time and time again, it's not about being anti-men per se, but just talking about the reality of intercourse for many people, millions of people. And this is another point, okay? It's not just one or two individuals who've had these experiences. Millions of people have. That is a big enough data set to start thinking, actually, this is very real and is not to be diminished and dismissed and ignored as if people are exaggerating, overthinking, oversensitive. You cannot vet, you cannot predict how somebody is going to treat you when they are aroused, when you are alone with them. You cannot predict that at all. It's quite interesting because when you look at some of these cases around, well-known people, for example, who are traveling, they are on tour, so celebrities, well-known people, and they get accused of sexual misconduct. When you look at some of the police reports and the accounts of whoever's accusing them of this sexual misconduct, you will be surprised to see that often choking, for example, is included in the things. And this is why I said we need to have more honest conversations about this, right? And this doesn't just apply to well-known and celebrity people, but I think it's very interesting because often those are the reports that are available publicly to be looked at, right? You meet somebody, okay? You're two adults, consenting adults, and you decide you are going to engage in sexual activity. You move into a physical space where that's happening. You've just met them. You don't know their history, you don't know who they were before. You've not asked them about their history because that doesn't always happen. Fair enough. Okay. You've just met the person and you go from level 0 to level 25 and choke them. And then after, when they may say that was uncomfortable, that was painful, that wasn't expected, I did not consent to that, you act confused. You act confused because, I mean, you consent. Yes, they consented to be in the room with you, and most people are consenting to some kind of, what may be considered basic standard sex act. They are not predicting or thinking that you're going to choke them. Yeah, see, and this is my point. There are certain things that happen in or during sexual intercourse that you can't predict. People don't announce or tell you, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to hold you down. I'm not going to listen to you when you indicate you're in pain. I'm going to ignore you. They don't tell you that in advance. So it is disingenuous to tell people you should have vetted better, you should have communicated more in advance, and if you're not comfortable, you shouldn't do it. If that's the vibe, then no one should be doing it with anyone, because you don't know who somebody is until you see them and who they are when they are aroused. And the number of women who email me, message me, and tell me that their own husband, they don't like who he is when he is aroused during sex. But outside of that, he's as nice as pie. The number of women who, as I say, especially in non-consensual scenarios, you'll meet men who are polite, sweet even, calm. But when they get you alone, they are not that person anymore. They are not that person anymore. When you talk to individuals who've been abused by parents, family members, those parents show them love in other situations. They gift them before and after. Right? This is why, if you're not adult, we can't have this conversation, because it requires being able to sit in the complexity, and just simply responding is downright insulting, actually, and it's offensive. I saw one of the comments that said, oh, it's because you've had sexual trauma in your past. That's got nothing to do with it. That's got nothing to do with it. We assume that because somebody may have experienced some kind of trauma in their past, that now suddenly they've lost all sense of objectivity. No, the facts are the facts. And like I say, when you have millions of people sharing the same or similar experiences, that is a large enough data set to pay attention to. But what we're really circling on is when women share their lived experiences, we are ignored. That's the point. When women share their lived experience, when it comes to having sex with men, we are ignored. We are dismissed. We are told that we're not really reliable narrators of our own experiences. That is the real problem here. Okay? There's nothing neutral about penetration, culturally, socially, physiologically. There's nothing neutral about it. Really, there isn't. Why do people, get worried about getting a colonoscopy, for example? So, okay. The other thing to be very honest about is that sex is generally focused on penetration, right? Because in some places, they don't even see it as a consummation of marriage unless intercourse, i.e. penetration, has happened. All right? In some religions, where they define what fornication is, for example, they will include a number of other acts in and around penetration. So the definition often of sex sometimes varies outside of the dictionary definition, one. And two, most sex is focused around penetration. So what do you need and penetration specifically of a penis? Okay? And actually, for a lot of people, their experience of sex is that it begins and ends with the penetration. There is nothing else around that. So who's being centered? The penis owner, the penis haver. Because once that enters and once it departs, then apparently that's the beginning and the end of the sexual experience for both people. Let's just be honest here. And the facts of the matter are that penetration does not guarantee pleasure for women. That's why there's such a big orgasm gap. And I find it very interesting when we talk about the orgasm gap. But let's even talk about pleasure, which is a basic here. Because you can experience pleasure without orgasm. But a lot of women are not experiencing pleasure either. So there's no pleasure and there's no orgasm. But that's okay, right? Because sex is focused around penetration. And the only person who benefits from that is the penis haver, is the penis owner. Okay? Isn't it funny that women can get pregnant and give birth to children? A woman could give birth to 8 children, but she's never experienced an orgasm and not had any pleasurable sex. Thankfully, procreation is not dependent upon the woman experiencing pleasure. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, okay. And if you are doing it in the ABC traditional way, then penetration is required often, okay, for, you to get pregnant, conception, right? In the ABC way, without external intervention, without science. Okay, so the act of penetration is charged with a lot, socially, culturally, mentally. People come into these situations with various understandings and beliefs around penetration. Okay, it is not neutral, and it's certainly not neutral for the individual who is receiving. Okay, so it's so important. The other thing, I saw some comments around, virgins. This one always cracks me up because people, again, think virgins are, lifeless, inanimate objects that don't have any bodily sensations, no self-awareness about their body at all. And that plays into a lot of misogynistic thinking, which is very convenient with men who fetishize women who are virgins, women and girls who are virgins. Because, when they believe that they can teach you something, introduce you to something, like your body lacks innate knowledge, data, and wisdom that can tell you this is painful, this is uncomfortable. It doesn't matter whether you've experienced it before or not. Right? That is why girls can report feeling like prey. That's an energetic thing. You may never have had sex before, but you can tell when somebody is looking at you for too long, when somebody's looking at you in a certain way. You can tell when you're in the presence of somebody and they are being inappropriate, or they're trying to lay the groundwork to be inappropriate. That wisdom, that sense of self is innate in the body. The nervous system is aware of it and can classify it as a threat or safety. Okay, so virgins, even though virginity is a construct, I've done a whole other video on that, right? You're not stupid. I wasn't stupid. I understood pain and discomfort the minute it happened, regardless of the fact that that may not have been a scenario I had been in before. So too can you experience pleasure. The body can recognize something that feels good, the same way it can recognize warmth and cold, the same way your taste buds work. You don't have to have tasted a particular food before so that when the first time you taste it, you think, I don't like this. This is what I mean. The way even virginity is spoken about with women is as if, you can just lay anything on a woman because she wouldn't know the difference just because she's a virgin. And that means what happens is, if you are going into an experience for the first time, you may think this is uncomfortable, this is painful, I don't like this, but the other person can tell you, oh no, it's just because you're a virgin that you don't realize. No. This is why I talk about women trusting what they know. We all have this innate bodily data and information and wisdom that we can indeed believe and rely on. We do not have to ignore pain. We do not have to believe someone else when they tell us that pain is okay or that pain is worthwhile. No, it is not. Pain is pain. And if you're in a situation where you're feeling pain and the other person is ignoring that, that is a problem. That is not a misunderstanding. When you say to someone, this hurts, this is painful, they should respond to that. They should be responding to that.